Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has taken some heat after introducing Bill 9, which invokes the Charter's notwithstanding clause to uphold three pieces of legislation dealing with gender identity in minors. Many argue that this hurts transgender kids, while others believe that it protects them. So joining us from Calgary to discuss this further is Jocelynn Rodrigues. She is what you might call a detransitioner, a biological female who formerly identified as transmasculine and has since transitioned back to female. And she is also a speaker with the organization Redeeming Conversations. We welcome you to Bridge City News, Jocelyn.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Okay, Jocelyn, can you first briefly tell us what Redeeming Conversations is?
Absolutely. We're a Christian apologetics ministry that focuses on equipping Christians to have everyday conversations filled with grace and truth.
Okay, there it is in a nutshell. So, Jocelyn, maybe give us a bit of your background. How did it all begin where you transitioned from biological female to male?
Yeah, absolutely. I basically was living for 14 years identifying as LGBTQ. And in the last 3 of those years, started to get very confused about my gender, really starting to see that I didn't think that I was female. And I really wondered if maybe I was more in the masculine side of things. So I started using they, them pronouns. I shaved my head on the sides. And then I really started to look into going on testosterone and getting approved for top surgery, which I did ultimately get approved for. I think a big piece was just the confusion I was feeling inside, feeling like I didn't know who I was. And then I had moved to Toronto from Vancouver, and I had connected with a group, FTM, Female to Male, and it had people from all different stages of their journey of transition. And I went there just really trying to understand, like, is this who I am? Is this gonna, be the solution to that which I'm feeling inside? And it seemed to align at the time, and I just kind of kept taking it one next step, and but I remained really confused and unsure throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I can imagine so many questions and so much confusion with all of that. How many years did you live identifying as male? Did you say 14 years?
So I was in the LGBTQ world for 14 years. So that was
Okay.
more, in there, I was jumping around from like identity to identity because my feelings inside kept changing. So I was like, wait, I'm lesbian. No, wait, I'm bisexual. No, wait, maybe I'm this. And it was the last 3 of those years where I really started to change my external appearance and present masculine. So 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then how many years has it been since identifying as female again or being cisgender?
It's been 3 years actually as well.
Okay. Do you currently have any identity struggles?
Actually, I said 3 years. I think it's actually been almost 4 now. Time flies.
It
And
does.
no,
Yeah.
I don't. I really have, my relationship with Jesus to credit for that, because it was really encountering Christ, who helped me understand that my identity was actually rooted in Jesus and not in things of this world, not in my feelings that change. And it was not anything anyone said, oh, well, if you're a Christian now, you have to do this. It was actually the work of the Holy Spirit who really just spoke truth into me that, you're a woman, I created you. That's a good thing. And I'm really grateful for that, because yeah, I'm very clear now that that's who I am. I think in the past I thought, well, I don't feel like a woman and I've never really been super feminine, so this probably isn't who I am. But actually what makes someone a woman isn't how you feel. It isn't your interests. It's actually just who you are. Like, that's just who you are. It's not something you have to try to do to arrive at. It's already just inherently who each person is, male or female.
Okay, getting back to Alberta's Bill 9, it has been called dangerous, hateful legislation that attacks trans kids. And on the other hand, Premier Danielle Smith is saying that Bill 9 is necessary to protect kids. So how do you see it, being someone who has lived on both sides of the issue?
I believe this is absolutely protecting children. I think we recognize as a society that children are still growing and maturing. It's why we have established minimum ages for consuming alcohol, for driving. Kids are not ready for treatments to make decisions on treatments that are going to cause, lifelong, irreversible damage to their body, and that is going to impact future things like fertility, which a child's not thinking about. A child's not thinking, oh, gee, I might want to start a family someday. And so, yeah, I do believe this is protecting children. I think the other thing is the Alberta government is thinking proactively, understanding that lawsuits will be coming from kids and others who were not protected from making these life-altering decisions that they were not ready for. So this is actually very wise to make limitations before there's more pushback. And Alberta's joining other countries like Sweden, Finland, Norway, the UK, and recently New Zealand, which are banning puberty blockers. These are countries that are traditionally more like left-wing socialists, and they're willing to do this because they realize that the facts are the facts, and it's just not safe for children.
Hmm. And you yourself, you were already the age of majority when you were going through this, I'm assuming.
I was, and it's interesting because so I was in my late 20s, early 30s, for that period, and even I was confused. Even I didn't know, right? And I didn't have all the information, and so how much more a child, right?
Yeah. And one of the three pieces of legislation that Bill 9 is, the notwithstanding clause has been put into place for. It was Bill 26. So this is the legislation that bans puberty blockers, hormone treatment, and gender reassignment surgeries in youth under the age of 16. So you obviously see this as protecting young people from harming themselves, I guess, other than harming young people, right? That's sort of the side that you're coming at it from.
Yes, I do believe, those young individuals, they're still growing and figuring things out, and change is occurring. And I mean, I think back to myself at that age. I didn't know what was going on. We're all a little confused, and that's okay. That's kind of part of what it means to grow up and get settled. And it's not to say that I don't have empathy for that situation. I mean, I get it. I lived that confusion at a later time, but I get it. But I do believe this is necessary to protect younger people from making decisions that they will, I believe, regret at a later date.
Yeah, no, I personally can see where that struggle is coming from too, as well. I have a daughter that's going through that as well, and thankfully she's of the age of majority as well. It would be difficult as a parent of a 12 or 13-year-old to be having to make these decisions. Some people might also argue, why should the government step in and tell people, is it the government's job to step in uh, for healthcare? I mean, shouldn't that be the parents' job?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, though, when you have situations where you have in schools where you have, teachers and students having sort of secret conversations where they're not engaging the parents, and the parents are not aware that that's actually really important, and there needs to be mechanisms in place that allow that parent to have that information, to know that. We've worked with a younger girl who was 13 when she started going to a LGBTQ group at her school. She was, didn't have a ton of friends, also had autism. So, she had a little bit going on for her, and, but found, a lot of welcome reception at this group. And so, started to engage with them, and then really started to think, well, hey, I've always kind of hung out with guys, so maybe I am a guy. And they affirmed her in that. And so she started actually living as male at school and coming home and living as female at home. She just hadn't talked about it with her parents. She figured maybe it's not something I should share with them, whatever the case may be. But it started to be very difficult for her. She was like living this dual life, and it actually resulted in her trying to commit suicide because she was just overwhelmed and confused. And that was when her parents found out, because they saw what was going on, and they started to, see, hey, what's been going on? And this was all influence from her school. And thankfully, she ended up meeting a young woman who was able to exemplify for her, like, hey, oh, I can be, a strong kind of person interested in these certain things and still be a woman. Like, that's a thing. Okay, great. And here's this friend I have now. And they actually ended up changing schools and moving because there was quite a bit of pushback when she was actually going back to being who she was, biologically, which was female. So I think it is really important to intervene. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't hear those sides of the stories very often because what you're talking about. So there's that other bill, Bill 27, which is ensuring that parents are involved in every decision about their child. So it's also saying that parents must be provided consent for teachers to use different pronouns or names for their children at school, or to teach them even gender ideology. And some, of course, are arguing that this robs the student of being who they identify as, and protects them from being outed to their parents. And, granted, in some households, this could lead to abuse, whether it's physical, mental, verbal, or spiritual. Do you see it that way at all?
What I see is that we already have legislation in place where if a child is being abused by their parents, there is already existing legislation to protect that child, and we actually have obviously obligations as individuals of society to report that if we're seeing that abuse.
Mhm.
And so I believe we're covered in that area, and I do think again that parents have an important role to play and need to be actively involved in their child's life, and there really shouldn't be secrets between teachers and students.
Mhm. Then there's another piece of legislation, Bill 29, that says that biological girls should only be competing with other girls in sports. So this would keep trans girls out of female sports. An argument against this is that it prevents a trans student from playing sports in the group that they identify with or identify as. But then there's, the flip side argument for fairness in sports and possibly also safety in sports. It's a tricky one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I am aware of is that the government is actually proposing a separate tier where anyone can join regardless of how they identify. And I do believe that is a way to meet in the middle, right? Where you're still allowing, biological females to compete with biological females and males with males. And then you have this additional tier where, and everyone can come so that no one is prevented from playing sports, but we're still also allowing for, fair play and safety, as you mentioned.
Are you sort of suggesting like a trans category?
Well, no, it would actually be regardless of how anyone identifies. So you could be a biological male, female, or you could identify as trans. So it would
Mm.
be just an
Everyone's just
open
competing
tier.
against each other. Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I think the goal of most trans people isn't to be known as a trans person; it's to be known as female or male or whatever it is they're identifying as. So that could open up a whole other can of worms, obviously, if they did something like that. I've heard people use that argument. Why don't they have a separate category? That's yeah, that's a tricky one. And Jocelyn, one of the issues that often comes up in this debate is the risk of suicide. And we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. So it's not uncommon for parents and physicians to say that the safest way to prevent this is to affirm the child's feelings about their gender dysphoria in order to reduce the risk of suicide. So, how do you approach this issue? I know you sort of touched on it earlier a little bit with that one story.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't agree with that statement that's being shared when people share that. I believe it's misinformed. Suicide has not been shown to dramatically decrease. And in fact, mental health issues often remain or resurface after the sort of initial novelty has worn off. And particularly because it's like one was putting their hope in this one particular um, aspect. And now they've done that aspect, top surgery, hormones, whatever it is. And then the realization like, oh, I'm still feeling what I'm feeling. Like, oh man, now that one thing I put my hope in. And that's usually why there's a progression of, okay, testosterone. Okay, well, no, now I need top surgery. Well, no, now I need bottom surgery. It's sort of a never ending thing. And you get to the end where you can't do anything more. And to me, I'm devastated at that thought because I know that people struggle in that place. And what I can say too is that I specifically know and spoke with the parents of a young daughter who was identifying as male and living that out. And they were affirming her, they were helping her and doing everything they were told they were supposed to do. And unfortunately, she committed suicide last summer, this past summer. And devastating, so devastating because here it is, these parents doing what they were told to do, and they're still losing their what was now identified as a male. And that's not an isolated incident. You do hear that story. um,
Mhm.
I think if if your teenager or preteen is telling you as well something like, hey, if you don't do this thing, I'm going to kill myself, that speaks to a larger issue going on, that they think the solution to any type of distress or problem is to end their life. It warrants discussion, it warrants addressing, absolutely. But I think we need to be thinking about it from a larger perspective, because generally speaking, the internal mental struggles that are going on, they're not just solved by changing your external appearance.
Okay. Yeah, I personally know some parents whose child was coming out as trans, and they would not hear of it. They would not acknowledge the pronoun. They would not acknowledge the new name, no matter what, not in my house. And I mean, it was after the child's third or fourth suicide attempt that these parents finally were like, wow, I think we need to affirm this kid. And once they did start affirming them, things changed. The suicide, attempts stopped. So, I mean, it's probably not a cookie cutter solution. So, Jocelyn, what advice would you have for parents during such a confusing time as to how to respond to a child who is expressing gender dysphoria to the point of questioning their identity?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that story. And my heart goes out to that person in that situation, because I mean, I remember myself in so much confusion, and there's a lot of confusion that goes on in this type of situation. To parents, like how to address that, what to do. Some things I would say is, ask questions. How did you come to this understanding? What's going on? Why do you feel like that? Like, when did this start? Just trying to understand, right, where they're coming from, because there's obviously something going on that's trying to be expressed. And so asking questions, I think, is really helpful. I would also say consider phone use and social media use, because we know that to be like a massive influence on people. One thing too is consider moving to a different school with the different influence of friends and teachers, because we do know that this can be quite pushed in particular schools. And a lot of kids, myself included in that situation, just looking for belonging and to feel accepted. And I recognize that every situation is different, but I think we can find some sort of themes in these. One other thing too is find a church that can help them learn about God's design as being good, and insisting on doing same gender events like girls camping or boy sports, and girls movie night, girl time with mom, boy time with dad, just things that reinforce the idea that you are who you are, but that's a good thing, and that gender is not something that they need to achieve, but is already something they can already embrace as a gift of God. Because I think, again, it's perceived as this like checkbox, like, well, I don't meet those checkbox criteria, so I must not be that, so I'm this other thing. And it's like, there's so many different ways that a woman, a young girl, can show up as that. There's no, it's society, it's sort of social media images and society that put the strictest categories on what is considered feminine, what is masculine. But there's so many different ways that you can show up like that. And I'm also happy to talk with people personally. So if anybody is, struggling and they want to just chat with someone who's been through it, I'm more than happy to make myself available for that.
Great. How do people get in touch with you, Jocelyn?
Probably the best way would be to just connect with me through Redeeming Conversations. Yeah, we have an email there. They could just say, hey, I heard Jocelyn speak. I'd love to chat with her. I'm happy to share, my personal story.
Thanks for sharing your views with us today, and also your personal story. Incredible. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Jocelynn Rodrigues is a detransitioner and also a speaker with the organization Redeeming Conversations. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.